The ring was colder than I remembered. It sat in her open palm like a small accusation, tiny and glinting in the gray light that spilled through the apartment's tall windows. Outside, the city buzzed on with its usual indifference, but in here, time had slowed to something jagged and cruel. "You're too much to handle," she said quietly, like she was breaking bad news to a stranger. Not angry. Her voice was steady, practiced. I looked at her hand first, then her face. She didn't flinch. Her eyes were dry, dark, and calm, like a storm that had already passed. The espresso machine still hummed on the counter. It always made this soft clicking sound after use, like it was settling. Focused on that stupidly. Something to keep my hands from shaking. "I see," I said. 2 words. They felt heavy in my mouth. She waited, maybe for me to argue, cry, beg. But I didn't. I reached out and closed her fingers around the ring gently, pushing it back toward her like a slow-motion scene I didn't quite believe I was in. "No," she said, pressing it back into my palm. "Keep it. It's yours." He nodded. I didn't want it. I didn't want anything in that moment except to disappear. She stepped back. The distance between us was suddenly a chasm. The kind you don't jump. The kind you fall into and never quite crawl out of the same. My bag was already packed. Had known somehow. You always know when something is slipping away, even when you pretend you don't. I crossed the living room. Our living room, though it didn't feel like mine anymore. The place was clean, staged, like no one really lived here. I remembered buying those tall curtains, arguing for the soft cream color. She had wanted gray. The elevator chimed as I pressed the button. She hadn't followed. Of course she hadn't. She'd stayed in the kitchen, arms folded, leaning on the counter like this was just another Tuesday. As I waited, I glanced once more at the door behind me. I thought about the nights we had danced barefoot in that living room, the fights that ended with silent apologies, the mornings we made coffee and avoided the cracks. When the elevator arrived, I stepped in. The doors slid closed with a soft hush. And then, only then, in that small metallic box suspended between floors and what used to be a future, I cried. I didn't sob. I didn't break down in some dramatic collapse. The tears just slipped down, quiet and uninvited. My throat burned, and my chest ached in that awful hollow way that doesn't make a sound. I stared at my reflection in the mirrored panel. My eyes were glassy, my face still. The ring was still in my hand. I didn't cry until the elevator doors closed. She walked in wearing all black, the kind of black that says I know exactly who I am. It was a gallery opening downtown, some pretentious exhibit with minimalist sculptures and overpriced wine. I was only there because my friend Melissa begged me to come. I had wine on my teeth and said something too loud about how one sculpture looked like a melted traffic cone. She laughed. That low, soft kind of laugh that hooks itself in your ribs and stays there. "I think it's supposed to represent duality," she said, sipping her drink without looking at me. "Or a nervous breakdown. Hard to tell these days." That was it. That was the moment. I turned to her and grinned, a little too wide. "So you're saying I'm not cultured enough to get it?" She finally looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, and her lips curled just slightly like she found me vaguely entertaining. "No," she said. "I'm saying I'm glad someone said what I was thinking." Her name was Elise. She smelled like sandalwood and cold air. There was something still about her, like she belonged in places where the noise dimmed itself out of respect. I, on the other hand, came in like a thunderclap. My friends always joked that I didn't enter rooms. I announced myself to them. We talked for hours that night. After the gallery, we ended up in a late-night diner eating greasy fries and trading stories like cards. I told her about the time I tried to dye my hair blue in college and ended up looking like a smurf. She told me about the cat she had when she was little that used to sleep in her sock drawer. Felt easy, dangerous, perfect. I remember thinking, she's so calm. She makes me quieter without asking me to be. I mistook that for safety. For love. From the start there were signs. She didn't like loud restaurants. She didn't like my habit of oversharing with strangers. She'd laugh gently when I got passionate about things, Books, politics, the way the moon looked too big on certain nights. You feel everything at full volume, she told me once, brushing hair from my face. It's a lot. I kissed her anyway. I always kissed her after things like that. Like my mouth could erase the discomfort in her tone. I had been told I was too much before. By exes, by teachers, even by my mother once when I cried too hard at a funeral. Too sensitive, too dramatic, too talkative, too in love with everything. But Elise didn't say it out loud, at least not at first. She just flinched in small ways. She closed doors a little faster. She left conversations unfinished. She'd smile at me but with her eyes already somewhere else. And I chased that smile like it was the last sunlight before winter. I started shrinking, laughing a little softer, editing myself mid-sentence. I told myself it was compromise, that I was learning how to be better for her. But deep down I was just trying to be less. Still, when she looked at me, really looked, it felt like she saw something I wanted to believe in. And maybe that's what love is sometimes. Not truth, but projection. A beautiful story you tell yourself until it falls apart. I should have known. From the very beginning, she held her wine like a shield, and I handed her my heart like it was a gift she couldn't refuse. She didn't drop it. Not at first. We were magic at first. Not the gentle kind, but the kind that sparks when two wires touch. Dangerous, electric, impossible to ignore. There was a month where we couldn't stop touching each other. Her fingers were always in my hair, tracing the curve of my spine, tucked into the space between my fingers like they belonged there. We'd spend entire Saturdays in bed, half watching documentaries, eating Thai food out of cartons, laughing at things that didn't even make sense later. She'd press her forehead to mine and whisper, "How did I ever live without this?" And I'd believe her. I'd never been loved quietly before. Elise didn't shout her feelings the way I did. No grand declarations, no love letters or spontaneous road trips. But when she looked at me, it felt like she was memorizing. When I cried watching a sad movie, she didn't pull away. She handed me a tissue and let my head fall onto her lap. She always smelled like vanilla and cedarwood, like warmth wrapped in stillness. I thought we were perfect, not because we were the same but because we weren't. I thought my fire and her stillness made balance. But the cracks started small. She hated when I interrupted her. "You always jump in before I finish," she'd say, and I'd flush with embarrassment, apologizing, biting my tongue for the rest of the conversation. When I got excited about something and my words tumbled out too fast, some new book I loved, a dream I had last night, a story about my sister, she'd blink slowly and say, "God, you talk a lot." She'd say it with a smile, teasing one. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. When she got overwhelmed, she retreated. No texts, no calls, just silence. She needed space. She needed time to think. And I gave it, though every second apart scraped at my ribs like glass. I'd send a text every so often, "Thinking of you," or "Hope your day's okay." Soft little offerings, hoping they didn't come off as needy. And when she came back, I always let her. No questions asked. Like nothing had happened. I started keeping my stories shorter, pausing longer before I answered, laughing a little less loud. I'd scan her face in conversations for cues. Was I saying too much? Was I overwhelming her? Was I being too much again? She never asked me to change. Not exactly. But she didn't have to. Her silences taught me well. Still, there were moments, flashes of closeness, that felt like sunlight through the cracks. When she left little notes in my jacket pockets. "You're fire and I love it." When she brushed my hair back in the mornings and whispered, "Don't ever stop being you." When we danced in the living room, her arms around my neck, my cheek against hers. And for a second I forgot all the ways I'd been shrinking. I lived for those moments. But they came less often. One night, I came home buzzing from a reading I'd done at a local poetry night. The applause had filled me like air. I rushed into the apartment, breathless, flushed, still half-lit with adrenaline. She was curled on the couch, reading. She looked up, offered a smile and said, "You're glowing." I knelt beside her. It was amazing. They laughed, they clapped. I even cried a little during the third poem. I think I finally found the rhythm in. She reached out and placed a hand on mine. Can we not, she said. Just for tonight. I had a really long day. He nodded. I always nodded. We watched a movie in silence. I didn't say another word. Later that night while she slept, I went into the bathroom, turned on the fan and cried into a towel. The next morning I was quiet over breakfast. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and chose not to say anything. Either way, I told myself it was fine. I told myself love is compromise. That passion is a storm, and peace is a shelter. That if I could just learn to take up less space, she might find a way to stay. I told myself all the right lies. And for a while they worked. Started with spoons. She hated when I left one in the sink. Just one. I'd rinse everything else, scrub down the counters, fold the dish towel neatly. But if there was a single spoon in the basin, it was a problem. I don't understand why you can't just finish the job, she said one night, dropping it into the dishwasher with a sharp clang. It's just a spoon, I muttered. That's not the point. Of course it wasn't. We stopped fighting about the actual thing. Dishes, laundry, lights left on. The arguments became code for everything else we didn't want to say out loud. I was too much. She was too distant. We were both pretending the silence was safer than the truth. She'd roll her eyes when I told long stories. I'd catch her scrolling through her phone as I spoke. My voice would trail off mid-sentence, swallowed by the growing distance between us. I started apologizing before I even knew what I'd done wrong. Sorry, I'd say quickly. I didn't mean to overwhelm you. Sorry, I'll keep it down. Sorry, never mind. She didn't even look up sometimes. The space between us felt like a hallway I could never reach the end of. She filled her calendar with work events and solo yoga retreats, saying she needed recentering. Time to recharge. I stopped asking if I could come. She stopped reaching for me at night. I told myself I was imagining it. That we were just in a rough patch. That every couple goes through this. But in the quiet moments, those long, aching gaps between her words, I could feel myself unraveling. I stopped telling my friends. First I defended her. She's just stressed, I'd say. She's always been more private. It's not a big deal. Then I just stopped talking about her at all. My best friend Jenna asked me one night, "Are you happy?" I laughed too quickly. Of course I am. But I couldn't meet her eyes. And she didn't push. I kept things curated. Happy Instagram posts, little couple snapshots, inside jokes typed with shaky fingers. But behind the screen, everything was cracking. I started journaling again, but even the pages judged me. Why aren't you enough? Why do you always ruin things? Why can't you just be easier to love? I reread our early texts, looking for the version of us that felt real. I watched old videos of us dancing in the kitchen, her arms around me, both of us laughing. I replayed them like prayers. But she was slipping. Or maybe I was. One night, after she came home late and barely looked at me, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and tried to see what she saw now. Was I too loud? Too emotional? Too dramatic? Would I ever be small enough to stay in someone's life? She came in while I was still staring. "You okay?" she asked, brushing past me. "Yeah," I said quickly, smiling like a reflex. "Just tired." She kissed my cheek, barely there, and left. The mirror stayed. It didn't lie. I pressed a hand to my chest, just to feel the rhythm. Still beating. Still here. But quieter than it used to be. I didn't know then that love can starve you without ever leaving. That sometimes the person who holds your heart the closest is also the one who lets it wilt in silence. But I was learning. Every spoon, every sigh, every step back. It was all teaching me what love wasn't. It was supposed to be a nice evening. Just a few friends, wine, candles. Elisa's perfect flatware arranged with surgical precision. She'd been planning the dinner party for a week. Her curated guest list, her minimalist playlist humming softly in the background. I offered to help cook, but she waved me off. "Just try not to get too wound up," she said, half smiling. "You always get a little extra." I laughed it off, even though I felt the words like a thumb pressed to my throat. By the time the guests arrived, I'd already had 2 glasses of wine. Enough to loosen the knot in my chest, not enough to erase it. I tried to be calm the way Elise liked. I told shorter stories, kept my hands in my lap, laughed politely at things that didn't feel funny. But by dessert, I was fraying at the edges. One of Elise's colleagues made a snide joke about poetry majors being emotionally unstable, and something inside me, some small, exhausted part, cracked. "That's a shitty thing to say," I said, too sharp, too loud. The room went quiet. Forks paused midair. Elise gave a tight laugh. "She's just passionate," she said quickly, placing a hand on my thigh under the table. A warning squeeze. "I'm allowed to feel things," I said, my voice catching. "It's not a flaw." She looked at me like I had set something on fire. "I need some air," I muttered, pushing back from the table. I made it to the hallway and sank to the floor beside the coat rack, my breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps. The world tilted. My palms were slick. I clutched them to my chest and tried to breathe like I used to in therapy. In for 4. Out for 7. But nothing was working. I felt like I was drowning in a room with oxygen. I heard her footsteps before I saw her. "Are you serious right now?" she hissed, crouching down. "You couldn't keep it together for one night." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Just tears. "You embarrassed me in front of my friends," she continued. "Do you even realize how exhausting this is?" She wasn't yelling. That somehow made it worse. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my dress. "I'm trying," I whispered. "I'm doing my best." Her eyes dropped to my trembling hands. "It's always like this," she said, standing up. "You get overwhelmed, you fall apart, and I'm left picking up the pieces. I can't do this anymore." There was something final in her voice. Something hard. I stared at the floor, dizzy, humiliated, still gasping. She sighed. Then reached into her pocket. And there it was, the ring. Simple, delicate, silver with a tiny stone. The one she gave me last winter when she said forever. She pressed it into my palm. "You're too much to handle," she said, as if that explained everything. She didn't wait for me to respond. She walked back into the living room, her steps composed, steady, graceful as ever. I stayed there a while. Long after the party ended. Long after the voices faded and the lights were dimmed. I stared at the ring in my hand and felt something ancient inside me go quiet. Not broken, just finally done screaming to be heard. Later, when I packed my things, I left the ring on the table. But that moment, in the hallway, under the weight of her words, was when it truly ended. That was the moment it snapped. The first morning after, I woke up in a stranger's bed. It was mine. My old apartment. My old sheets. But everything felt foreign, like I was slipping into a life I no longer remembered how to live. The silence was different here. Not peaceful. Just blank. I moved like I was underwater. Made coffee I didn't drink. Stared at the mug like it had answers. My phone buzzed once. A friend checking in, probably wondering how the dinner party went. I didn't respond. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want anyone to see the version of me she left behind. The second day, I opened our shared photo album. Hundreds of pictures. Sunset selfies, coffee dates, weekend hikes. I didn't cry. I just deleted them one by one. My thumb hovered sometimes, but I always pressed delete. The hardest photo was the one where she kissed my cheek while I held the book she bought me for our anniversary. I looked so happy in it. So full. I saved that one. Then deleted it too. I found the ring in my coat pocket, right where I'd stuffed it after the party. It felt heavier than before. I didn't know what to do with it. I set it on the windowsill, next to a dead plant I'd forgotten to water. Eventually, I opened the drawer where I kept my journals. I hadn't written in months. The last entry was from the night after she gave me the ring. The handwriting was messy, excited, giddy. She said forever. I think I believe her. I want to believe her so badly. I closed the journal before I could read more. Later that night, I sat on the floor of my bedroom with a trash bag. I filled it slowly. Old movie stubs, notes she left me, the sweatshirt I always wore when I missed her. One by one I let them go. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just necessarily. I didn't cry. Not then. But when I lay in bed that night, I curled into myself the way I used to as a kid after a nightmare. No one there to rub my back or say it would be okay. Still in the dark I whispered it anyway. It's okay. We're here. You're still here. And somehow that had to be enough. It wasn't the first time. I realized that in the middle of folding laundry, a week after the breakup, when silence had finally become something I could breathe through. My hands were moving on autopilot. Shirts, socks, the familiar rhythm of domestic life returning in pieces, when it hit me like a slow, steady wave. You're too much. Elise hadn't been the first to say it. Just the last. There was Mrs. Langley in second grade, after I cried because my class goldfish died. You're a little dramatic, sweetheart. There was my first boyfriend junior year, who told me I was exhausting when I cried during a movie. It's just a story, he'd said, rolling his eyes. My mother, when I came downstairs in tears after a fight with my sister. You need to toughen up. You can't feel everything. Even my college roommate, half laughing after I stayed up all night helping her through a breakup. God, you care too much about people. Each of them had chiseled a little piece of me off. A little volume turned down. A little softness hardened. A little spark dimmed. Until I learned to filter myself. To apologize for having a heart with no off switch. Elise didn't break me. She was the final echo of a belief I'd been carrying my whole life. But what if they were all wrong? What if being too much wasn't something to fix? What if feeling deeply, loving hard, speaking loudly, that was exactly who I was supposed to be? Maybe the problem wasn't that I took up too much space. Maybe the problem was that they kept handing me smaller and smaller rooms. I sat on the floor, surrounded by unfolded laundry, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of the size of my feelings. I didn't try to quiet the voice in my head that wanted to scream. I deserved better. I let her scream. Then I breathed. I wasn't too much. I was more than they were ready for. More than she was ready for. And that wasn't mine to carry anymore. I went back to the open mic on a Tuesday night. The same cafe where I read poems years ago, back when my voice still shook and I thought passion made people uncomfortable. I hadn't stepped foot in the place since Elise told me she didn't get poetry, said it felt like people bleeding for attention. But I was ready to bleed again, this time for myself. The cafe smelled like old books and burnt espresso. The lights were dim, the chairs mismatched, the walls lined with handmade flyers and art that didn't care about being pretty. I signed my name on the list. Just a first name, Maya. I sat at the back, notebook in my lap, fingers tracing the worn edge of the page. I wasn't nervous. Not the kind of nervous that wanted to disappear anyway. It was the kind that buzzed in my chest, alive, alert, like something was waking back up. Hey, someone said beside me. A woman in a paint-splattered hoodie. Her curls were piled high, and she had a sketchbook balanced on her knees. First time, she asked. First time in a long time, I said. She smiled like she understood exactly what that meant. It always comes back when it needs to. He nodded. I didn't need to explain. She didn't ask me to shrink. When it was my turn, I walked to the mic and read a piece I wrote the night after Elise gave the ring back. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't falter. It wasn't a poem about her, not really. It was about losing yourself trying to be small enough to stay. About finding your voice in the rubble. When I finished, people clapped. Really clapped. No one looked embarrassed or unsure. I saw heads nodding, someone wiping their eyes. That was the win. Not the applause, but the way my truth made room for other people's. Afterward, the woman in the paint hoodie came up to me again. That was a lot, she said. In the best way. I laughed. Yeah. I tend to be. She grinned. Good. We need more of that. I walked home that night humming. I stopped at a corner bakery and bought myself a cupcake with rainbow sprinkles. Because I wanted to. 'Cause it made me happy. Because no one was watching, and even if they were, I wouldn't have cared. I ate it on the walk home, frosting on my fingers, smile on my lips. For the first time in a long time I felt whole. Not fixed. Not finished. For me. And that was enough. I saw her outside the apartment building on a Sunday afternoon. She was unlocking her bike, sunglasses on, hair shorter than I remembered. She hadn't seen me yet. For a moment I just stood there, watching her from across the street, the wind tugging at the hem of my coat. The building looked smaller now. Not just physically, though it did, but emotionally. The weight I used to carry at its door was gone. No tightness in my chest. No need to rehearse what I'd say if I saw her. When she looked up and spotted me, her mouth parted in surprise. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. Neither did I. We just stood there for a moment. A silence between us, but this one wasn't painful. It was clean. I nodded once, calm, sure. She gave the faintest return nod, then turned and pedaled away. That was it. No last words. No apology. No closure wrapped in a pretty bow. And I didn't need one. I walked past the building without looking back. No ghosts followed me. No memories begged to be reopened. I'd already packed them up and carried what I needed. The rest I'd left behind. I kept walking, the late afternoon sun warming my face. A poem forming quietly in my mind like a secret I was finally ready to write. For so long I'd been afraid of my own volume. Of the way I burned too hot, felt too deep, spoke too boldly. I'd let people treat my intensity like a flaw that needed fixing. But now I knew better. Too much no longer felt like a curse. Felt like truth. Felt like power. I used to cry behind closed doors. Now I walk through them.